Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. I'm Marshall. It's nice to have you along. It's nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. And this time around, we've got a cool little vintage watch. This is an affordable $70. I get this on eBay for Enicar. This is an interesting one. Enicar is a cool company. Going all the way back to the 1850s, the Racine family was making watches in Switzerland. But in 1914, Arist Racine and his wife Emma, they wanted to start their own company. But they realized that the Racine name was already taken by a relative. It was copyrighted. So what they decided to do at Emma's suggestion was just reverse the name. So Enicar is just Racine backwards, and Enicar was born. They actually had a very long history of making watches and equipment through both world wars and well into the tool watch era of the 50s and 60s. But they were hit really hard during the quartz crisis. And in the early 80s, they needed to restructure the company. And by 1987, it was liquidated. And though the company still technically exists today, it doesn't share any of the models, manufacturing, or history with the original company. This watch says Star Jewels on the dial, but strangely, that's just the name for a process using a combination of ultrasonic cleaning and a chemical treatment that makes the oils stick to where they're supposed to be in the escapement. The watch is actually called an Ocean Pearl. But it's a lovely little vintage watch, and let's see how good we can make this thing run. First, though, we got to see what's going on with it on the time grapher. So let's get it on the time grapher and see how it performs. Oh no. Well, this is kind of what you don't really want to see. The time grapher is actually having a difficult time producing a reading of any sort, and we're getting that wall of snow thing going on. So this watch is at least in dire need of a servicing, and hopefully not more than that, but we'll see. So let's get into it and see what we've got going on here. Beautiful little signed movement. You can see it says Enicar on the bridge. And it's also a signed case back with Enicar Watch Company Swiss. And it does seem to be running okay, but I think it's running at such low amplitude, or maybe it's just so off that the time grapher couldn't even pick it up. So first things first, we need to take the watch out of the case. We're going to remove the case screws on the side. All these only have one job, and that is simply to hold the case against that movement ring, the movement against the movement ring there that you see inside. And that way the dial doesn't slip forward and hit the crystal, or things aren't shifting around in there. And now we can take the movement ring out. Yeah, these type of watches just go to show you that if you're patient and look around on the used watch market, on eBay or any of the forums or whatever, you can find some deals. Like if we can get this thing running again, $70? Like, this thing has like a kind of a sunburst dial on it that's just gorgeous. And it's got a cool history. Even their logo's cool. It's like Saturn. It's a little planet of Saturn. All right, now we can take the hands off. To do that, we can make it a little easier on ourselves by aligning them, by putting the winding crown back in. And I'm just going to put down a piece of plastic so that I can get my levers on here. The levers are actually polished on the bottom so that they won't scratch, but it only takes half a second to put a plastic bag down just to make double sure that there's no marring of the dial. It's just a safety precaution. Also, a safety precaution is using these tweezers that have Delarin. It's a type of plastic tips on them so that they don't damage the hands. Again, you can pick up hands with regular tweezers and they won't damage them by default. You're just running a little bit of extra risk, and if you happen to have the good tool for it, you should use it. Okay, so let's take the dial off. As you can see, this is a time-only watch. There's no date function, there's no chronograph, there's nothing. No moon phase. A very simple watch. And the dial comes right off. I really like the dial with the 12369. And then that sunburst pattern that it has in the background. It's a lovely dial. Simple, but that's how I like them. So now we can take the dial washer as well as the hour hand off, or hour wheel off, excuse me. And so far so good. Nothing's falling off or missing. There's the cannon pinion, but as we know, that's friction fit on. Anytime you hear friction fit, that just means that it was pressed on and held there by friction itself rather than being, say, screwed on or even glued on or something like that. And of course, the first thing that we're going to want to do is take the balance off of the watch. And the reason I say that is because it's a safety thing. Right? A lot of the methods that we use to take apart watches and put them back together, you could do it multiple different ways. Like, for example, I don't have to take the balance off of this watch to start disassembling it. I can take other parts off if I wish. But why? Why would I take the balance off first? And that reason is very simple. It is the most delicate part on the watch. There's actually two very delicate parts on the balance. There's the balance spring, and there is the balance wheel pivots. Both of those can be broken if, say, a screwdriver were to slip and jam down into that area. They could bend or break those parts. So you take it off first just to be careful. Now, in this case, I flip the watch over and take off the cannon pinion. The reason we do that isn't because of safety concerns. There is no difference in that part. It's because that cannon pinion is actually attached to the center wheel that you can see right in the middle of the movement. So if I leave the cannon pinion on, I can't pull the center wheel out. When I take off these bridges, I may as well get it out of the way now. Now, next what I'm going to do is what we call let down the mainspring. The mainspring in this watch is wound up a little bit. And it can be a little easier to take the watch apart, and you can risk a little bit less if you let the power out of the mainspring first. So that's what I'm doing. Now we can take off the ratchet wheel, which is actually attached through a couple of parts, but it's actually attached to the mainspring. When that wheel turns, it turns the arbor, the barrel arbor inside of the mainspring barrel, which we'll see in a few minutes when we get there. And that's what actually pulls on the spring and winds it up inside of that barrel. Now we can take off the click and the click spring. These are what keep that ratchet wheel from unwinding. That's it. They let it wind up in one direction, but then not unwind in the other. That's their whole job. Very, very simple part. It's just a curved piece of metal that fits into the teeth in one direction and has a spring to push it there, but in the other direction, the wheel is allowed to pass by. That's it. There's the spring I was just talking about right there. And there it is jumping away. But as you can see, it did not go far. But still, I should have probably used a pointer stick or a piece of pegwood just to hold it down to be extra careful, because I have lost those before and spent a good amount of time looking around on the ground, and that's no fun. So now we can take off the barrel bridge. Now this one, each bridge on each watch is a little different. This one actually only goes over the barrel itself, as you can see here. So I'll take it off now. So far, this watch looks perfectly fine inside as well. There we go. No crazy wear or anything like that, and we can continue by taking out the barrel itself. The barrel's made up of a few parts. There's the barrel itself, the barrel cap, the arbor, and the mainspring inside, so 4 different things. We'll take that apart in a few minutes, though. We'll set it aside for now. And we'll start working on the crown wheel. Some crown wheels have one screw on the top. It's usually reverse threaded, but some of them use 2 small screws like this, and either way, it's not difficult to figure out. And now I can start looking to take off the train wheel bridge. And the train wheel bridge in this case also happens to have the ratchet wheel on it as well. Again, different movements are designed in different ways. And this one just happens to cover 3 train wheels, the main center wheel, as well as the third wheel and the fourth wheel in this case. And I can take these screws out. And if you ever notice that I put them down or take a look at them, it's because what I'm doing is cataloging them kind of in my head, or at least noticing any differences between the two. This one's a little stubborn, but you can see why. It's actually got a much larger top on it than the other two. And I'll remember that in my head for when I put the watch back together. Now I'm trying to gently pry off this bridge, but it actually just kind of went flying on me. So, whoops. Not really the way I want to do it, but there we go. So there's the center wheel. Now that's the one that has the cannon pinion attached to it on the bottom. If I had left the cannon pinion on, I wouldn't be able to pull it out. Also, as you can see, this one's actually designed a little different. That bridge that I took off actually covered the escape wheel over there. And there's a center wheel underneath a separate bridge. So this one tricked me a little bit too. So I want to take off that intermediate bridge so that I can take off the escape wheel and that wheel at the bottom as well. This is the first Enicar watch I've ever bought. The chronographs that they made, particularly in kind of the tool watch era in the 60s, are very, very valuable now, very sought after models. But these smaller time-only ones you can still get for a heck of a bargain. Okay, so a couple of more wheels to take off here. And it looks like the pallet fork's a little bit in the way, so I'm just going to be patient here and just take off pallet fork bridge, and the pallet fork actually comes with it, and then I accidentally drop it on the bench. Not really what you want to do, but well, I'm learning still. And now I can finally take off that last wheel. Now I can switch my attention to the keyless works and the motion works, which most of which are actually on the other side of the watch. But while I'm here, I can take off the 2 main parts there of the keyless works because I have access to them from this side anyway, so I just go ahead and grab them. That's the setting lever screw, which will release the setting lever on the other side as well. Now it's being held in place by the setting lever spring, but it'll just be free after I take that spring off. And we call it the setting lever spring, but it's actually more than just a spring. I'm taking it off. Actually, I'll take it off next, but it's actually a cover plate as well. And in some cases, it even acts as 2 springs. Not in this case, though. So this just has a little cover plate over the minute wheel and the intermediate wheel from the motion work there. So that'll come out here. There's that little intermediate wheel. That's actually what the sliding clutch engages with, for those who know what that is. Now we can take off the setting lever spring. A little stubborn, but we got it. And there, the setting lever just fell off when I took that off, kind of as I predicted. So once this spring's out of the way, that'll only leave the yoke and the yoke spring left, and then this watch is mostly disassembled. And it looks like the the yoke wants to come off before the spring. Now I am going to use a piece of pegwood just to make sure that this spring doesn't go flying on me. And there it goes. So I will now put the balance back on the main plate here. And I'm going to do this because I want to clean these parts. They're going to go in my watch cleaning machine. And I need to put the balance in there, but where do you put it? Like if you just put it as it sits, then you have a very thin spring attached to a very heavy balance wheel, and things are getting spun around and all that kind of stuff when you put it in the cleaning machine, and that will easily damage or just straight up ruin the spring. So what the best way to do it is, or at least the way that I've been taught, is to put it back on the plate here so that it's protected, and then you can run it through the watch cleaning machine safely. And there we go. Now we get to get inside of this mainspring barrel. Again, there's the components I mentioned before, the cap, the barrel, the arbor, and the spring. And we'll need to take those all apart. And we do this mainly so that we can clean these parts. And see a little bit of grease on the cap, but not a huge deal. But taking a quick look at the mainspring here, there seems to be a major kink in it right before it gets to the arbor. And that's not a good sign. A mainspring can operate like that, but it usually will fatigue and break because it's under pretty significant stress. And that's very concerning. You see that kink right there? That is supposed to be a nice round curve, and instead it has this very sharp turn, and that makes me think that this mainspring is damaged, which could have been why I got this for so cheap, or even perhaps it could affect the running of the watch, though I wouldn't assume that, as if it'll wind, it's still going to be able to transmit power at least. But again, the longevity of this mainspring is highly questionable, because that type of kink in it is really bad news. That right there, I'm sure you can see it on the camera, but it is that is not what you want to see. But at any rate, I've got the watch completely disassembled, and there it is, all the parts of the watch laid out, and they are now ready to go in the watch cleaning machine. So let's get them all put into their little containers here. That basket goes into the cleaning machine, and when I took it out, that's right, the mainspring broke. Now, this is not a surprise at all. I thought that when I took it out of the barrel, it might break, because it looked like it was just on the verge anyway. But as you can see, it did give out, and we are going to need to replace the mainspring. The truth, though, was going to do it anyway. Here's the problem. I can't find which exact mainspring size I need for this movement online, so we're going to have to do this manually, but I wanted to show it to you anyway. So we have to figure out the height, the length, the thickness, and the barrel diameter for this. So let's start measuring. First, we'll do the height. So I've got my tool here to measure this. And the height of this mainspring is 1.3 millimeters. So we can write that down in the height. Now we need to figure out the thickness. And it looks like it's 0.11 of a millimeter. And now the length. So I'm just going to take a tape measure here, and remember there is a little bit of an end piece, so we'll have to add on a little bit. But it looks like it's about 360 millimeters or so. So we'll note that down, that it might be a little bit different than that, but it looks like 360, and then the barrel inner diameter is 10.2 millimeters. Or 10.5, rounding up. So now we can go to the internet. I often go, there's a few websites I use, but Cousins UK is one of them. And I'm going to show you how I do this, because I know that if you're planning on doing watchmaking at home, which I hope you are, that's part of the reason why I have this channel, you're going to need to know how to do this. So Cousins has a great site for this. You can type in all of the dimensions, so 1.3, 0.11, 360, and then hit search, and there it is. There's our mainspring. So we can add this to the cart. As you can see, it's going to cost me about £7. to get this mainspring, but that's how you do it. You can go through and just put the dimensions in if you don't have the exact one, and there it is. It's arrived, and it looks much better than the other one. So hopefully that's helpful for you, because this is something that comes up fairly often. Now, one weird thing about this one is that normally it would go in the other way with the colored part of it up, but this mainspring seems to be wound in the other direction, so I'm putting it in upside down. It's a little confusing to me too, but this is how I'm going to do it, and boom, just jettison that cap off, but it looks like I've got it into the barrel anyway, so I'm good to go. So now I'm going to put the barrel arbor in. This has a little hook on it that grabs onto the mainspring. And now I'm going to apply a little bit of 1300 oil to the barrel arbor so that where it comes into contact with the cap will have some lubrication because it does spin on that axis. And then I got this little thing that you can put this on, and then it kind of applies pressure around the top to click it down into place. You can also just use tweezers, or if you even have to, you can use your fingers to do this. Okay, so we've got our mainspring barrel all reassembled, and that means that we can get going on the movement. Now, the first thing that we're going to need to do, though, is, again, for safety's sake, we need to take the balance back off, because that's actually one of the last things that we put onto the watch. So we'll take this and set it aside, and then we can get to work on this thing. So we're going to start here with that wheel that goes at the very bottom. I'm going to use a little bit of lubricant there on that hole just to make sure that it's good to go. And then I can put in the escape wheel before putting on that lower bridge, if you remember from when we disassembled it. All right, so let's get this thing secured. And now we can continue with the train of wheels. Now, some of you sharp-eyed viewers will also see that there's a cap jewel on that bridge. I did take that off and lubricate it, but it was too difficult to film, so you won't see it on the video here. But I know that some of you have wanted to see the cap jewels for the balance get lubricated, which is also difficult to film. I did film it for this one, so you're going to get to see that in just a little bit. For now, though, we have the tricky business of putting this bridge back on top. And of course, the tricky part is that the pivots from the wheels have to line up in those holes, and all three of them have to be perfectly aligned before the bridge will sit into place and the wheels will spin freely underneath. So what I'm going to do here is grab this little plastic stick to apply minimum pressure to the bridge, really just a very small amount. And that way, once I get the holes lined up, it'll just click into place. I can also use the stick to hold it there once it does, because as you grab screws and start screwing things down, you can bump that bridge slightly and then one of the pivots can come out. Now, that's not a huge deal. It just means you need to do it again. The huge deal comes if you knock one of those pivots out but don't notice it and then screw down the bridge. Now you've got a pivot that's off to the side and then a bridge that's being forcefully screw down upon it, and I think you can figure out what happens to the pivot in that scenario. So that's why I'm keeping that light pressure on the bridge the whole time, and then just a quick test to make sure that these wheels are spinning freely and everything looks great. Now I can put the mainspring barrel in. Nobody ever calls it the first wheel, but in the progression of first wheel, main wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, escape wheel, it is the first wheel. But we just don't call it that, and I don't know why. So the barrel bridge can go on now. Really hoping that this thing runs well. The fact that the time grapher couldn't get a reading on it at all really leaves us with not a lot of information. The most likely conclusion is that the amplitude was so low that it couldn't even grab a reading off of it. But it could be a number of other things. Now I'm going to start lubricating the top parts of the barrel here. So this is where the crown wheel is going to go, and then also I lubricated the barrel itself against the barrel bridge, because there's a good amount of friction there. We actually use the HP 1300 oil, which is the second most viscous oil that we use. The lightest one is 9010. But this is the thicker oil for the more high tension parts. And a lot of the winding and setting parts will take that, or even a thicker one, it's a grease that we use. So those ones are actually under a pretty significant amount of friction, especially for what you'd consider for a wristwatch, which you wouldn't consider too much friction going on in there, but there is. So now I can get the two little tiny screws in place there for the crown wheel. And before we put the ratchet wheel on, well, we've got to put the click and the click spring back into place, because the ratchet wheel sits right on top of the click spring. And again, I'm just going to be a little extra careful here and grab my pointer to make sure that the click spring doesn't want to jump off on me, because they are very small. They can travel quite far. And they're so lightweight that they can stick to clothing or hair or a little corner of your desk that you never thought existed. And so those are the ones you really don't want to fly away. You also can't hear them when they land, which means that you just have no idea where they went, because a lot of the time you're working with a loop or maybe even under a microscope, and when something flies away, you don't have eyes on it when it flew either. Quick test of the click, and we can put in the ratchet wheel. The ratchet wheel is a little funny because it has a square in the middle of it that has to line up with the top of the barrel arbor, which is also a square. That way, when that turns, it actually winds it, where, of course, if they were both round, it would just spin. All right, let's get this firm, but not too firm. And now I can oil the train of wheels. The train wheel pivots. This is using 9010. I use a very small amount of oil. And now you can see that I'm going to use some of the grease, because I can turn the watch over and start to pay attention to the other side. And as I mentioned before, the other side of the watch, by the way, this is the dial side. The dial is going to go on top of this part. Has two major components of a watch. It has the motion works, which is what turns the hands of the watch to actually show you what time it is. And then it also has the keyless works, which is what I'm putting together here. And the keyless works is what allows a watch to both be wound by the crown, but also set the time by the crown. The keyless works is the intermediary to say, all right, which one do you want to do? When you turn this crown, do you want to wind up the watch, or do you want to turn the hands? So a little bit more lubricant on the post here for the intermediate wheel and the minute wheel. This is 1300, by the way. for those of you looking to get into the hobby. I mentioned it before, but a big reason why I started this channel was because I found this hobby so fascinating, and I like to share the things that I find with other people in case they also might find it fascinating. So if you are looking to get into the hobby, I think that this is a good video for you to start, because in many ways, this is where you should be starting off, on a watch that costs under $100. If you completely ruin this watch, you could consider it a $70 lesson. And if you manage to get it back together and working again, especially if you don't have to do anything crazy, you're going to have a handsome little watch for a very good price that wasn't running well and hopefully will be by the end. And these are the type of watches that I recommend. These, and then also pocket watches. Pocket watches are much bigger. The movements are much, much bigger than these type of watches, and that makes them easier to work on. And they're criminally cheap. You can pick up pocket watch movements for very cheap from the 1800s that are like US made or Swiss made, really high quality, beautiful ones. And the reason is because after they went out of fashion, there was literally millions of them in the world and nobody wanted them anymore. So what people did is, a lot of times they were in a beautiful gold or silver case, and they would take the case, melt it down, or sell it, and then they just had this movement and nobody wants them. Now they're flooded on eBay and everywhere else, and you can pick them up for really, really cheap and use them as practice. Getting back to this one, we've got most of the keyless works in. Here comes the setting lever spring after the setting lever's put in place, as well as the yoke and the yoke spring. And a quick test here just to make sure that turns over. And as I mentioned before, this is what's responsible for letting you either wind the watch or set the hands. When you pull that crown out, it puts it into hand setting mode, which is what we're in here. And when I push it in and you see it click over, it winds up the mainspring. It's really an ingenious little piece of engineering. Now there's this little cover plate that covers a minute wheel. Now it's time to put in the pallet fork. So we flipped over the movement again. I've actually put the pallet fork in some one dip to make sure that it's perfectly clean. And now I can start putting them into place. Now I'm putting in the pallet fork bridge. I'm holding it down once again with that little plastic thing for the same reasons that I did before. The pallet fork pivots are very delicate. That leaves us with one more part to put on, and that, of course, would be the balance. This is the most important part of the watch, and this is, of course, the moment where we get to find out if this thing is going to run or not, and it wants to. It really wants to, but it keeps stopping. And it does look like there is life in this watch, as you can see it start to kick up. So this is very good news. It means that we didn't screw anything up horribly, but we have to remember this watch was running before. So as good as it feels to see it start to really come alive again, we still don't know how it's going to do on the time grapher just yet. Now, before we find out, we need to clean off the cap jewel. So I am comfortable doing this enough now that I've decided to try a different camera angle so that you can see a better view of it. This is called a shock spring, and I have to simply undo it, and then I can take out the jewel. I'm going to use a piece of Rodico to do so because it's easier to grip it. It's a little bit sticky. Now I'm going to take that. It's a cap jewel and the setting. It's two separate parts. I put them in one dip. This is a solvent that will clean them, and now I need to lubricate them. So here's a little bit of 9010 on my oiler, and what I'm looking to do is put a drop in the middle of that jewel that's about as a third of the total jewel or so worth of oil. Now I don't want it bleeding off the sides, and I don't want it ugly. I want just in the middle, roughly speaking. And then I can take the setting here, and capillary action will actually have it just stick to it. And that's exactly what I want to see, and there we go. So now I can put it back in the movement, just like that. And now the only thing left to do, at least on the top part here, is this. Close up the shock setting again. And again, this is a very fiddly, tricky thing, but it's not super hard once you get the hang of it. And you're going to have to do it on basically every watch, so you're going to have to get the hang of it at some point. But as you can see, this is a spring. That little brass thing is a spring, and it is very, very, very spring loaded. It wants to jump away, so you do have to be very, very careful with it. And there we go. So now we have a cleaned, lubricated shock setting and cap jewels on the top part of the balance, which means that we only need to do the bottom now. So similar setup on the bottom, though it is a little bit smaller. And a little bit difficult to get in there, so I have to use only half of the tweezers. But if you're careful, you can just sort of hinge up the spring and not have it jump away. If you're not careful, this is what happens. So I got a little bit aggressive there, and now the jewel is out of the setting, and I'm trying to take it out without bending up anything else or screwing it up. But it's a very fiddly little thing because it also gets caught on the spring, but as you can see, I do manage to finally take it off. So it's coming out of the one dip now, and as you can see, the one dip is a solvent, but it evaporates very, very quickly. And this one actually has a little bit of dirt, so I'm going to use some pegwood to just clean it off and give it another bath in the one dip. You really do want these cap jewels to be just immaculately clean if possible, because now you're going to put the oil on, and this is a part that sees it, you know, in this case, I think it's a 28,000 vibrations per hour. So that's going to see a lot of friction. So now I can put that one single dot of oil in the middle, drop on the setting, and I can put it back into the watch. Now that went a little bit better than taking it out. Now I just want to gently nudge the shoulders of the spring back into their setting, and then we will have the cap jewels all lubricated. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. It's not complicated, but it is definitely something that takes some practice. So with that job done, let's see how this thing does on the time grapher. First things first, we wanted to get a reading. And we have a reading. In fact, a much improved reading. As you can see, it's gaining quite a bit at 10 seconds a day, but we haven't regulated it yet. And I'm going to actually show you how I do that. So with it still on there, I can bump over the timing regulator and start to see. Now, as you can see, I've gone too far and now it's losing time. So I'm going to bump it slightly back over to the positive side. Little tiny changes make a big difference. So it was at minus 27. And now it's at minus 22, and now it's at minus 15. And as you can see, I'm making adjustments as I go. And I'm showing you in fast motion so you can see how the different changes make. And what you do is you just gradually, one little thing at a time, zero it in, making just the tiniest little adjustments until you get it where you want it. Okay, now we're getting really close here. Now it's just losing a second a day. It's got a 0.1 millisecond beat error. The amplitude's okay at 204. This is an older watch. I wouldn't mind seeing that a little higher, but I'm going to have to accept it for now. And as you can see, it was minus 1 second a day. Now it's minus 3. And we're going to call it good there. So we got this thing running way, way better than it did before. And I'm very happy about that. So movement is good to go. Now we can turn some attention to the case. First things first, there is a gasket here. So we'll carefully peel that out. But thankfully it hasn't melted or embedded itself in there or anything like that. And we can take the crystal out. Most of the time these crystals will come out with just a good firm press on 2 thumbs. This one has an armored crystal. But I'll be honest, this thing's not going to see any ocean time any soon, so I don't think I'm going to even try to get it back to full waterproof. I mean, I'll replace the gasket and the crystal and stuff, but I'm not going to go crazy trying to get this thing a great depth rating. So now we can put the parts in the ultrasonic cleaner. and just make sure that they're good and clean. You can see there's a little bit of gunk around the crown tube here and a little bit where the gasket sat. So I'm just going to use a regular toothbrush to kind of help loosen up that stuff about halfway through the cleaning cycle here in the ultrasonic. And back in it goes to finish up. And this is what we came away with. Much improved. The case actually looks really good. I could polish it up, but I'm not going to for this one. Generally, I prefer not to, but I am more open to doing so now. So now we need to pick out a new gasket. Really trying to take you through what it's like to restore kind of a normal watch that you'll find. And I've bought this assortment of watch gaskets. And as you can see, it has a whole bunch of them of varying sizes. There's a lot of different parts that you can get for watches, and they come in what they call assortments, and it just means a box of a bunch of them. You can get crowns, you can get watch hands, you can get springs and jewels, and you can get O-rings like this, all different sorts. So I've picked out one that I think will fit. But we do need to make sure that we get some silicone grease on it. So this little tool, if you want to call it that, does that. It actually has sponges on the top and bottom that have that grease impregnated on them. And then you can just slide it back and forth to kind of clean the gasket and, get it a little bit of that grease on there so that it'll stick in there. And then also so that it won't crack or anything like that. And there we go. So the gasket's good to go. Now that does leave the crystal, though, that we still need to replace. So we'll get out the Rober crystal press for this, and I found one of these, also on Cousins, by the way. And this is just a brand new, regular old crystal. This is acrylic. And it is kind of crazy how we put these on. You put them on the press like this, and it actually bends the crystal down uniformly so that it shrinks its diameter enough for you to put the watch case around it. And then you undo the press, and that lets the crystal expand into the slot at the top of the case there. And this is one way you can put on a crystal. These ones are not press fit, right? Some crystals have to be sort of shoved into place, but these ones are actually held in under tension from the crystal itself. But having a Rober press like this, that's the name of the brand of this press, makes it very easy. So that job is done. Now I'm just going to clean up the dial a little bit with some water. That's it. I'm not using any detergents or solvents. I don't want to ruin this dial. I don't want to take away its charm. But sometimes these can get a little bit of staining or a little bit of dust or dirt on them. And I don't want that. That doesn't seem to add to the charm to me. So I'm going to go ahead and just give it a quick brush down, and we can start putting together the rest of the watch here down the stretch. So I've got the hour wheel and then a washer. There actually was two of them next, one on top of the other, but I just put one of them back. And now the dial goes on. And now I can get to the hands. Now, the problem is I picked up the hands and they actually stuck to my tweezers. And I'm like, what is going on with these hands? And it turns out that the loom on these hands has melted. It has turned black. It is sticky. It does not look good. And I want to do something about it. And since I've started, you can see how sticky these hands are. I'm going to re-loom these hands. Again, I don't automatically do this on every watch. I pick and choose which ones I think could really use it. But I really think that this watch could use it because, again, the loom has turned like actual black on these and has deteriorated into something weird. So there's two reasons to replace the loom here. One is for looks, but the other is because if that loom continues to deteriorate, especially in a way where it's kind of melting and turning into kind of a sticky substance, that can absolutely make its way from the hands into the movement of the watch, and that will cause big problems, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. So I am going to re-loom these hands. So first things first, we have to scrape off the old loom. And now I can get out my looming kit. This will produce loom that is white. And that isn't really what I want here, but it is the first step. So first I'm going to take it's like a binder. You know, this is just the chemical that they use as the liquid to hold the loom that will dry as a solid. That's all it is. So now I can take some of the loom from the loom bottle and then mix them together until I get the consistency that I want. Now I've done this on another project and learned the hard way that you really do need to get this right. The first hand that I did, it was too thick and I had to redo it. So this one, I'm trying to really make sure that I get the consistency correct on it first. And let's see how this turns out. Yeah, that is actually right about where you want it. So I'm happy with the consistency, and now I can re-loom the hand. Of course, we put the loom on the back of the hand, not on the front. And then what happens is it kind of fills in the crevices of that, and it looks just uniform from the front. Takes a few hours for the loom to dry, but I usually just leave it overnight because I'd like to make sure that it's completely set up exactly how it's going to be before I kind of inspect it and start working on it further. And here's the hands after they've been finished, or I should say after they've dried. Looks pretty good. Loom is nice. Now here's the problem. It's white. It is like stark white. And I don't like that on a vintage watch because it doesn't match the rest of the aesthetic of the watch to have these two super bright hands sitting there. And that's going to bother me. The other thing that's going to bother me looking at this hand is that there is a corner that still has the old loom. Can you see it right there? That black corner should be white. And I know it might seem silly because it really only shows up on like a microscope or on a macro shot like this. It bothers me. It just does. Like part of the whole thing about this watchmaking is getting it right. And so I'm going to redo it because I just wouldn't feel right. I'm probably going to end up selling this watch or giving it to a friend. And if that's the case, I want it to be right. So I'm going to start over on this hour hand and I'm going to scrape off the loom that I put on and I'm going to mix up some more loom and I'm going to let it sit overnight and I'm going to get this thing right. Really annoying to find something like that, but it's my fault. I mean, I clearly didn't clean off the hand as much as I thought I had because I could see there, right in that corner. And this is a weird hand because it has such sharp corners, but now I'm sure that I've got it clean. I even put it in the ultrasonic to make sure, and I can once again re-loom the hand and then let it dry. You know, as a hobbyist watchmaker, you're going to make mistakes like that, and it's up to you. I think a lot of people will just leave it, and it's probably fine. I mean, the truth is, nobody would ever notice that. It's just me. All right. So we'll get the loom on here and let it dry, and then we can actually continue with the project because I'm also not done with these hands yet. Of course I'm not done. Here is what the hands look like when they're actually finished, and the loom looks beautiful, but it's too bright. So I'm going to use a technique that I used on a prior video on here. I am going to put, in this case, tea, black tea, yes, the kind that you drink, on the hands here, just to take that harsh white edge off of them so that they'll blend in with the watch a little bit better than if they were how they are right now, where they're like basically brand new looking. And I know this is weird, but this has worked for me in the past. And until I find a better system, I'm going to keep doing it this way. Just make sure I get that last little tip there. And now this is the downside of doing it the way that I'm doing it, which is that the tea or the coffee, whichever one you use, actually ends up drying on the hand itself. And if that's the case, it means you need to use a little swab here to take off the dried part, because otherwise the hands end up just kind of looking dirty, and I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is just take a very lightly dampened pointer swab here, and I'm just going to clean up the edges. The problem is, if you do this on the loom, it will also take off the tea or the coffee from there, and it will no longer look aged. So this is some very finicky work, but in my mind, it is actually worth it, because whenever I see a watch and it has re-loomed hands that clearly look brand new on a very old watch, it stands out to me dramatically, and I hate it. So here's how the hands look after the treatment with the new loom and a layer of black tea dried on them with the hands cleaned up. And I'm very happy with that. That is exactly how I want it to look. So now we can finish the job here and put the hands on the watch, get the watch cased up, and call this thing a project. So there's the hour hand on, now the minute hand's going on. Really want to emphasize, by the way, the idea of the channel here and also on what I think you could do if you were interested, and that is to look for these type of bargains, right? I mean, I'm telling you, $70. And we got this watch running within 3 seconds a day. We put in some work to get the hands looking good again, to clean up the dial a little bit, to get a new gasket on it, to clean up the case, but not polish it. I didn't even polish it. I just put it in the ultrasonic and gave it a good cleaning. And wait till you see the results of this watch. It is a gorgeous little dress watch. Last steps going on here. We put a new crystal on it as well. You know, the cost, by the way, to repair this was not expensive. You know, the crystal was like 2 pounds, so, you know, a couple, $3 or whatever. The mainspring was 7 pounds. That's, you know, 10, 12 bucks. And this is what the watch looks like when it's done. What a cool little piece, right? It's got the sweet Saturn logo. It's a known brand. It says Star Jewels on it. This is what it looks like on my wrist. And I would wear this watch all the time. No problem. This is a great little daily watch. This is the type of watch you can wear to a little more special event if you want. But if you just want to throw it on and wear it around, no problem at all. This thing will absolutely do it. And I think it came out beautiful. Trying to capture the dial is a little difficult, as you can see, but it has a sunburst dial from the inside out, and it captures the light in cool ways. It's very legible with the 12369 numerals on it, plus the hands. Very simple watch and a great one. I recommend looking for watches like this. It doesn't have to be an Enicar, but these are the type of watches that I think an amateur watch repairer like myself should focus on, especially at the beginning of their watch repair journey, because you can bring back a watch for pretty cheap that is a really nice special watch that you can own and enjoy for a long time. That is going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. I did start a Patreon for this channel. If you want to support what I'm doing here directly, you can go to patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. And you even get some cool perks. You can see some videos and some progress stuff as it goes. I really appreciate that. If you just want to say hi or get some in-between project updates, you can head over to Instagram. My Instagram is wristwatch_revival. I'm on there basically every day. Would be happy to say hi. And you can even get some updates about what's going on with my projects in between video uploads. Once again, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll see you next time.